So Sony had its big PS5 showcase yesterday, and wow, I was not prepared for what I was about to experience. I figured it would be a reminder of the games from the previous showcase, and then they would finally show off the price and turn on pre-orders, but boy, oh boy, was I wrong. They came out of the gate swinging with the announcement of Final Fantasy XVI. I'd heard rumors that an announcement for 16 was coming, but I don't like to give a lot of weight to rumors until the evidence makes it seem undeniably true, basically. But now that we've actually seen it, I'm so glad that it's coming. I loved every single aspect of the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I'm sold 100% on their ability to deliver the rest of the parts with similar quality, but I was a little worried that the series was just going to be at a standstill for however many years it took to complete all the parts. So it's great news that we'll be getting 16 in, presumably, the next few years, too. But anyway, I digress. The trailer was a cold open for the showcase, and it started off with a close-up of fire that slowly zooms out to reveal it's in the reflection of an eye. Now, I know this might sound a little silly, but I had a pretty strong feeling that this was Final Fantasy as soon as I saw this portion of the character's eye, specifically because with only a little bit of the hair and eyelashes, I don't know, something about the art style was very indicative of Noctis's eyes from 15. But when it pulls out from the eye like this and reveals more of the character design, it's very evocative of the generic representation of the player character in Final Fantasy XIV, aka the Warrior of Light, especially in the Shadowbringers trailer, which I'll put up right now. The blonde character here is saying that their target is Shiva's dominant, and only the dominant, which lends itself to some interesting speculation for lore about what a dominant might be, but we'll get back to that later. The dialogue continues, but the real focal point here is the battle between two groups on Chocobo Back, which is something we really haven't seen since Final Fantasy XII. And they're wielding swords and axes too, which indicated to me a possible return to leaning more into the fantasy side of things than sci-fi, which also really hasn't happened since 12. A character says that the enemies have summoned their icon, which definitely made my ears perk up as a 14 player. The summons in that game are referred to as primals by the main characters, but the enemy force, the Garlean Empire, calls them icons, which makes me think it might be entering the Final Fantasy lexicon as a alternate term for summons like Eidolon, which is used in 9, 13, and the 3D remake of 4. And then we see the logo of the development team, Creative Business Unit 3, which is a pretty huge reveal because this is the Square Enix studio that works on 11, 14, and the Dragon Quest Builders series, and is led by Naoki Yoshida, the director and producer for Final Fantasy XIV. This trailer does not like to waste time, though, and shows us this game's version of Shiva in all of her icy glory as she throws some ice spears at what I can only assume is Titan, even though they don't say the name. And then when he punches the ice, a bunch of rocks come flying down, and look at this. This dude just gets completely crushed into gore, which isn't quite what you'd expect from a Final Fantasy game, even if it's just a quick shot. And then we get a bunch of angles of what looks like a castle courtyard, and this is where it really solidifies the fantasy focus. The clothing, the aesthetic, it's all very different from the more modern looks we've gotten used to in single-player Final Fantasies recently. We learn that the young boy here is named Joshua, and he has healing powers and an outfit that's pretty reminiscent of the typical white and red robes white mages have used throughout the series. He gets escorted away, and a voiceover that I assume belongs to this cute potential protagonist describes himself as Joshua's shield and that he's sworn to protect him, which definitely makes me think of Final Fantasy XV's Kingsglaive, which is in charge of protecting the royal family, but the party member Gladio in that game specifically refers to himself as the King's Shield, so it's a little interesting. Also, badass white chocobo alert. Next up, we get to see a little bit of the combat, which looks super active. To me, I see a lot of emphasis on dodging and combos, including a part where the character lifts an enemy into the air and then juggles it before knocking it back with a fire blast. And then right after, there looks like an execution or a finishing attack sort of mechanic. We cut back to another cutscene with what sounds like some political drama of allegiances and promising to support each other and someone not holding up their end of the deal. And then, pretty surprisingly, we get to see this game's version of a Malboro, which is a big FF staple. Lots of fire blasting in the gameplay here, which makes sense because I'm going to assume that elemental weaknesses play a pretty big part in the combat, which I'll get into in a second. The character also gets to do some flippy dodge roll stuff, which is always fun. As the dialogue from the scene continues, they mention the blessing of a mother crystal, and it seems to be important to this nation or group in general, which reminds me a whole lot of Final Fantasy Type 0, where each nation has the blessing of a different crystal. And there's a really cool shot of Titan in here too. My favorite job and general archetype in the entire series will probably always be the Dragoon, which uses lances and jumps up and comes down to impale an enemy. And this trailer knew exactly what I wanted by showing one high in the air and flipping his lance around like crazy before rocketing down to the ground below. This looks like a really fun boss encounter to me, a one-on-one fight like this. And then we get to see some more combat with a Coeurl, which is an enemy name I've never really known how to pronounce. It's Coeurl, so pronounce that however you want. And then they're fighting a disgusting club-wielding orc thing. And if nothing else reminded me of Type 0, Joshua seeing someone get beheaded in front of him and then getting covered in blood from the attack definitely would. It's honestly surprising the tone that they're going for with this game, and it's already a cut above the level of violence we saw in Type 0, which was I believe, the first M-rated Final Fantasy game. I have a feeling we'll be seeing something similar to that here. When it goes back to the gameplay, we get a really clear view of what I think will be a core mechanic of the battle system. We've seen this character do some cool stuff so far, but this sequence confirms, at least to me, that we'll be channeling the power of the icons/summons in combat to do specific moves. I'm not sure if we'll unlock them as we go or start with them, obviously, but it looks like what might be the Phoenix ability is an uppercut that launches the enemy into the air, and you can tell it's Phoenix because of the wing that appears, and after that there's a green particle effect, which I feel pretty strongly is Garuda. Not because of this shot specifically, but the previous one, also with green particle effects. You can see bird-like talons appear and attack the enemy, which is very much a Garuda thing. And then we see Earth Fists appear and punch the crap out of an enemy, which has just gotta be Titans. I wonder a lot if this will be limited by MP or something, but it's impossible to tell without any of the UI visible. Cutting back to Joshua now, we hear someone say, quote, "It's the Archduke's son, the Phoenix," as he screams after seeing the person get killed in front of him, which then summons Phoenix down from the sky. Going back to that very first shot of the trailer, talking about Shiva's dominant, I think in the lore, Joshua might be Phoenix's dominant, and dominants might have the specific ability to summon them or control them. And I wouldn't be surprised, given previous 14 lore with crystals and summons, that each country probably has one dominant and one summon or icon that represents their nation. And after that, the man on fire from Metal Gear Solid 5 appears and explodes into a icon of fire, who of course rises from the ashes of the courtyard as what I can only assume is Ifrit, or Ifrit. We got a super cut of a lot of the scenes we've seen so far while Ifrit and Phoenix fight a little bit, and then a shot looking up at Ifrit while he presumably rips someone or something apart. It's probably Phoenix, but we don't see any feathers, just huge bursts of blood from his hands. At this part, someone screams, "Joshua, wake up," which makes me wonder if it's a plea for Joshua, representing or controlling Phoenix, to wake up because he's being ripped apart, or if Joshua somehow became Ifrit and is in a blind rage destroying Phoenix. There's lots of stuff to think about for sure, but that's unfortunately where the trailer ends for the most part. We get a close-up on the guy who called himself Joshua's Shield, and then the character who was sitting in front of the fire at the very beginning of the trailer, and I can't help but wonder if these might be the same character before and after a time skip rather than two separate characters, but unfortunately we'll have to wait and see. They have a very similar face and the exact same eye color, so that's just the vibe I'm getting. It could be totally wrong. But of course, no Final Fantasy reveal would be complete without a beautiful Yoshitaka Amano logo illustration. They've always been gorgeous, and this one is no exception, showing Ifrit and Phoenix fighting. Color-wise, it's very similar to Final Fantasy X. The logos of each Final Fantasy is usually pretty indicative of a main aspect of the game, so I'm really curious to see how the events of the trailer end up being important enough to warrant a feature as the game's logo, too. I was so floored and emotional because of Final Fantasy fanboyism from this trailer that it was kind of hard to even pay attention to Spider-Man Miles Morales after it was over. I kept just replaying in my head what I remembered happening in the 16 trailer instead, even though Spider-Man Miles Morales looks amazing too. Anyway, I've shared most of my thoughts on it, and I want to get to the Demon Souls gameplay, but I do want to say, as one last thing, that Naoki Yoshida, who I mentioned was the director and producer of 14, is the producer of this game, which I think is an amazing fit, primarily because this is the first time Final Fantasy has really been leaning into the fantasy genre in the 14 years it's been since 13 was released, other than Final Fantasy 14, which is very fantasy heavy too. So putting him on as a leadership role here just makes sense in my opinion. The director of the game, Hiroshi Takai, is someone I'm not personally familiar with, but he's been working at Square since Final Fantasy V and worked on both 11 and 14. Square Enix picked up a former Capcom developer who worked on Devil May Cry 5, I think, a while back, and I've seen people saying that this person is involved with 16, but I haven't been able to find any actual official information confirming that, but either way I would not be surprised if that was true given the action and tightness that the combat seems to have. Also, dang, this trailer is a full 4 minutes. I'm so used to teasers for games like this, I love how much we got to see. But anyway, that's Final Fantasy XVI. I love everything I've seen so far, and I can't wait to see new information they're going to share in 2021, which they announced. Sony was not done hyping me up, though, because we got 4.5 minutes of uninterrupted gameplay of the Demon Souls remake, too. It starts off by flying through the Nexus, a place we know very well. Just like everything else we've seen from the remake so far, the lighting and new assets look incredible, although I'm not sure how I'll be able to adjust to a Nexus that's this dark, but it could just be a temporary thing. We also get to hear the wonderful soul of the lost withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended. And we get to see the Maiden in Black herself. And then a quick cut to that bridge in the tutorial area that I talked about in the last video I did on the remake. They added a cheeky little wooden fence that you now have to hop over, like when you meet Ostrava for the first time, instead of just rolling or walking off the ledge. What really impresses me with this is just how incredible it looks while also running buttery smooth at 60 FPS. Just like before, the Dreglies don't give up a fight to get you acclimated to the controls, but I love this right here, just instantly teleporting from the Archstone thanks to the PS5 solid-state drive. You see instant loading like that in the Ratchet & Clank PS5 game too as a main mechanic, but this is my first time really seeing it in action in a different game, and it's awesome that I have the experience with the PS3 loading times of Demon Souls to compare it to, because it's pretty fast. The foliage is gorgeous off to the side as he takes out the same enemies from the original tutorial. The 2 weak soldiers and then the Blue Eye Knight, which of course they take down with an absolutely beautiful new interpretation of the riposte animation, just stabbing right into them, lifting them up off the ground and then slamming them back down into it. And then they take down the next Blue Eye Knight by two-handing their sword, which of course adds 50% to your strength stat. It really irrationally bothers me that they don't pick up the item right here, but obviously it's not the point of the video to be a complete experience or anything, but I can't help have that feeling either way. Or the fact that they don't attack the archer that's off screen to the left at the top of the stairs. Love the way the forge looks in the next room, though. After the first fog door, they make a beeline for the Vanguard boss room, and I talked about this a lot with the screenshots that came out around the time the first trailer dropped, but the foliage and greenery added along with the lighting just does so much for the atmosphere of the area. And here's the fight. Of course, just like everyone's first attempt at fighting Vanguard, they don't quite make it, but it's amazing to see how similar the fight is, especially with regard to his animations and attacks and the room itself. Also, I love the blood trails that follow where you hit him. How sad. Okay, so this "you died" thing, I'm a little iffy on. I'm personally going to assume that it's a mock-up for the trailer and not what you actually see in-game because there's no UI in the gameplay in general, but I'm going to be pretty disappointed if they removed the extra text below the "you died" from the original to make it more in line with the other Souls games. In case you don't remember, if you haven't seen it, it says, "However, the Nexus traps you. You shall remain in this world as a soul forever." And I'd be sad if that little flavor text is gone, even if the loading times are practically nothing in the remake. But Sony is not interested in disappointing anyone, apparently, because that's not all we got to see. A jump cut showed us Armor Spider, and I am so happy to report that the fight looks exactly as silly and gimmicky as it was in the original. You're trapped in the back of a tunnel, you get covered in sticky white stuff and slowed down, and then you get killed by fire. It's a classic. We get to see Tower Knight smash his shield with a much more clear area of effect indicator with blue flames instead of that glowy white cloud it was before. And then it cuts to that great riposte animation again in the path right before the Tower Knight, and then we get to see the dragon breathing fire down on the bridge in the first area of World 1. The cuts get really fast here, so things are going to get pretty brief. Of course, the Tower of Latria looks just as amazing as you would expect with these graphics. One addition I really like that you'll see more of in a later shot are ominous statues on the sides of the towers in 3-2 here. You can sort of see it to the left with a green glow. Here's Flame Lurker, who unfortunately still looks the same, but it's a small complaint. He rushes up and punches you, so that's definitely still Flame Lurker in a nutshell. The stairs at the beginning of 4-1 have a really neat addition where it's raining now, which kind of begs the question why it wasn't raining before in an area called Shrine of Storms. But anyway, lightning strikes the dead tree to the left, and that's an amazing visual flourish to welcome you to the area. Then a nice quick backstab animation in Stonefang Tunnel in the area immediately after Armor Spider, and then a cool shot of the player attacking the gargoyles in Latria, which are very much made out of stone and they crumble when you hit them. Love that. But the statue to the left of the gargoyle is what I was talking about earlier, just adds a ton of atmosphere and detail to the area. I really like how Armor Spider, rather than just blasting fire at you, releases oil onto the ground and then ignites it, and that runs towards you rather than the fire from its mouth just increasing and pushing you back like before. And here's that bony wand finger scythe dude, Armor Spider again, Flame Lurker, and then Armor Spider one more time before the logo fade in. I honestly don't really have a whole lot to add to this other than it looks just as amazing as I was hoping it would. I'm not sure why they chose to not include this in the trailer, but it was confirmed to be a launch title for PS5, so now I'm pretty much guaranteed to get one on day one as long as the supply can meet the demand, because I am not going to miss the chance to experience one of my favorite games of all time finally getting the attention and respect it deserves. Sony absolutely killed it with this showcase because of these two reveals, in my opinion. Other things like the new God of War tease and Resident Evil Village are exciting too, but these take the cake, and I could not be more excited for everything to come out on Sony's new console. Thanks so much for watching, take care of yourself, and stay safe. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on these as well as anything else that was in the showcase too that you're excited for. Bye for now.